Okay, so hello, I'm Jim Bednar. It says James. Whenever I write it down, it's James, but if I say it, it's Jim, just to keep it confusing. I blame academia. I always have to write it exactly the way I published my first paper so that people can always link them up. But I don't walk around like that. So I'm the Director of Custom Services at Anaconda, and that means I run consulting projects. So professional services or anything like that. But I'm not really here to talk about that. This is kind of more related to the work that I used to do as a professor. I spent 10 years as a professor in computer science and neuroscience. And that's where I was using Python. That's where we started using Python. I had lots of students using Python, and we were all developing open source and writing Python to try to solve scientific problems or try to understand scientific data.
You can just speak a little closer to the mic. Maybe?
So this is the mic?
Yeah, I can give you a...
How's this? Is that better? All right. So basically, we were writing Python code for ourselves, for our collaborators, and our to try to answer science questions. We weren't trying to sell it. We weren't trying to make money, and we were frustrated. This started in 2003, and Python at that time was it didn't have NumPy. If anyone knows that name, there was no NumPy, so it was hard to do science. I know. How did we do anything? Well, we did it by hand in the olden days. But that's not where you are nowadays. Now, we actually have software written at that time is now old. And so we had no software. Now we have a bunch of old software, and then we have some new software. I'm going to tell you about the newer software. And I'm coming to it as a scientist. And at that time, we were trying to do neuroscience, but every field, every domain had developed its own independent libraries in Python and the different ways of doing things. And by now, those are old. A lot of them are built on things that predated Python by decades, like climate science. Sure, and NumPy originally. A lot of the underlying algorithms are implemented in Fortran. It runs, it's accurate, it's fast. Why mess with it? And that's true for a lot of fields. NumPy is used across fields, of course, but a lot of fields have domain-specific software. Some of it's wrapping old code. Some of it was written in Python, but it was written 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so maybe just to help know my audience, like you could write Python for pure Python's sake, but usually it's written to solve a problem or to work in some domain. So what domains do we have represented here? Anybody in? So what do you got?
Video management.
Video management. What is that? Porn?
We collect surgical video, so I have to manage all the metadata, all the pipelines, deal with object identification, computer vision, all that sort of stuff. So I got a lot of video to manage.
Okay.
All sorts of processes on that.
Okay, that's a domain. Anyone else?
Finance.
Finance. Finance shows up. Okay. Telematics. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, yes.
You do computational physics now, like social media scraping and analysis.
Computational physics and social media scraping both, or separately? Oh, used to. Okay, I'm trying to envision the intersection there and failing. Yeah. All right. Any other, thinking about a core set, any others that are going to define this space here? So pushing at the boundary?
Someone listed it.
Oh, on the chat. Oh, that's what you're pointing to. Like, I didn't write that, but okay. Okay, so you're pointing to the chat. Okay, so just think about all of these, all areas of science, all areas of analytics, anything that does number crunching, whatever it is, today people are using Python for it. So my assertion is whatever they're doing, it's probably outdated. It's probably was written for a certain desktop GUI, a certain operating system. Generally, it'll be inheriting whatever was the common practice at the time. So they wrapped up some library that's only available for Windows, and now that domain is moving forward in Windows, or it's moving forward in a way that only works on a single machine and doesn't scale up to a cloud approach. And then you'll have some renegades over there doing the cloud-friendly approach, but they have to use different tools because the standard tools typically they aren't scalable. And that's either because they weren't written in a distributed fashion or There's licensing code involved. You bought one license, you get one processor. You're done. And also, most of these things were written by people to solve their own problems, their friends' problems, and so they are solving the same problem over and over and over again in every different domain. And so that means that each of these little stacks of tools is being maintained by a small group of people, even though many of the problems they're solving cut across all of science, or maybe many of them, each of them, a third of science. And then a different problem cuts across a different third of science, and a third of analysis and engineering, including corporate, including academic, including government. All of those are huge sources of money, huge sources of talent, huge sources of people who could run projects, but they're each running separate projects because of history. My assertion is all of these things that are listed here, storing data, reading data, processing data, plotting data, analyzing data, modeling, exploring, all of that's data. It's just data. Now there are a lot of differences between fields, but the vast majority of things are shared. And if we can kind of coalesce around a shared infrastructure, that's what I'm here to proselytize about. I want to say, hey, we already have that infrastructure. It's already here. We've already been using it. We use it all the time. We want everyone else to use it. So, introducing, this is a brand new talk about things that we've been doing in Anaconda for 10 years and that I've been doing as an academic for 20 years. So this is old stuff, but we're trying to put a name to it and say what it is that we're doing. Why are we doing it this way? Is it important to anybody? And to point out that we're doing it at all. And where it's been done is a bunch of different open source libraries, dozens of different open source libraries. Each one has a name. They generally have a logo. You can visit there. You can learn all about it and have no idea that this is related to all these others that have a different name, a different logo, different maintainers. But we're all working together. And this is a stack. That's my assertion. In fact, we thought, is it a stack? Is it an ecosystem? What is it, a collection? It's a stack. And a stack is a bunch of software tools that together can be put together to solve a problem. So it's not an ecosystem with a bunch of independent things that come and go. No, this is a stack. You can select from within the stack, but it's a stack of specific tools that together solve science, solve engineering, solve analytics, solve 80% of everything. I made that number up, but whatever. And so this list, I also made all these up. I wrote those all down, and then I stopped when my slide got full. And there's a lot of discussion of them, but I'm gonna have to revisit this. And if I have enough time, you're just gonna have to stop me. At the end of the slides, I go through each one of these in detail. We probably won't even get there. But let's just say those are all good things. And all of these tools come from what's commonly referred to as data science. And data science, it's a tricky term, and I'm gonna define it here as data science is what's shared across the disciplines. That is probably not what anyone else thinks of it. They think, oh, it's some statistician running some A/B testing and predicting which one you're going to click on. Maybe, but really data science to me is science without the domain. So it's like forestry science minus the forestry, climate science minus climate, physical science minus physical. It's whatever is shared across that. All of them are dealing with data. All of them have things in common, and you can actually solve a lot of the problems at the same time. And that's super important because then everyone can be working in the same direction. You can be sharing tools, you can be sharing approaches, you can be sharing money, like funding streams. If you're in a small neglected corner of science, but there's a big one right around the corner that is heavily funded for whatever reason, because it's leading to defense work or whatever, well, you can benefit from that. And also, when you're doing work in some particular area, you have some analysis that might be relevant for your company's bottom line or for your next paper. You're working in a domain, right? But you might veer right off the edge of your domain into another one or to something that wasn't traditionally considered part of your domain. And that's where a lot of innovation happens. So if you have a tool set that stops there, you're never going to innovate. But if you have tools that span across all the domains, you just, today I'm a neuroscientist, tomorrow I'm a climate scientist. And literally that's what I did. We took our software for neuroscience designed to understand how function is distributed across the surface of the brain. We immediately, like a week later, applied it to the surface of the earth, changed the scale bar. And they worked because we didn't plug in anything about our domain in the original software. So This is my new figure that I'm very proud of, and I hope it's understandable, but I think it's going to take some iterations. So this is kind of the definition. These are the anointed projects that are in this stack today. Now, tomorrow you ask me, I'm probably going to anoint another one and realize, oh yeah, that one's also pretty important. And these are, even the categories are important here. It's new to even think of this as this way, but basically I'm saying if you're going to solve some problem in science or analytics or engineering, you're going to have data somewhere. Your problem started immediately already. As soon as your data exists, it almost certainly is in a format that doesn't support any of the rest of the stuff on this slide. Like if it's a big CSV file, I'm sorry, you can't stay that way. None of the rest of this will work because a CSV file, in order to find the 1 millionth record, you have to read the first 999,000 to find even where the 1 millionth record starts. These things are all built to support distributed computation, 1,000 processors working each on independent chunks. So you have to start with some data storage that'll, if you care about the things I had on the first slide, which is about having the same tool set for things that run on your laptop, or for solving the human brain, or for solving all of climate. And so everybody can be talking to each other. It's got to be scalable. It's got to work here. It's got to scale up. So you have to start with file formats that either inherently support efficient chunked access. So each of the 1,000 processors finds its chunk and deals with it, and another one finds its chunk and deals with it. Everybody works independently, and then they combine the results. Now there are file formats that do that. Parquet is very popular for columnar data. There's a format called ZAR for multidimensional data, images, stacks of images. If you're running a microscope, you're going to want to use ZAR. If you are getting data from a satellite, you'll want ZAR. If you're looking at financial time series, you want Parquet. And then there are every manner of a database. We happen to support DuckDB because it supports the sort of things we want very quickly. And then there's this whole box here that I'm trying to figure out what to do with, which is, I call it legacy. I'm going to get in trouble with somebody for that word, but these are the things that were designed. By legacy, I mean designed before. They're designed to be real small, so don't worry about them. But everything in that box was designed before easily accessible distributed computation.
There's no wizard there. Ignore the person behind the curtain.
Yeah, so in that box is old stuff. And if you combine old stuff with our fancy library called chunk, it will index every little bit in there and then treat it like it's one of these fancy modern formats. So if you have terabytes or petabytes of data, the way our NASA colleagues do, what they do is they run chunk on it, and then it acts like ZAR. Even though it's in a file format that was written before the cloud, it doesn't matter because we can index all the chunks, store the index in Parquet, and every processor looks in the index, finds its chunk of that original legacy format. So you don't have to use these, but if you do, your life will be super easy. And if not, you're going to have to do some work, add a driver to chunk, and then you can handle any file format anywhere. Yes?
So I'm not familiar with the DuckDB, but you could use any database there, just like Postgres or anything?
You can, but the performance will be abysmal.
The performance will be abysmal.
Yeah,
okay.
The ones that are on this file, this thing, are the ones where it's going to work well. In fact, this is an open stack, but as soon as you add stuff, you have a high likelihood of screwing everything up. So everything on this page here is going to work well together, and it's going to be operating at native machine speeds that can be fully scalable from the smallest problem to the petaflop supercomputer problem. You add one thing in here, it's almost certainly going to be a bottleneck. So you change the file format to something other than these, use a different kind of database.
So what, without getting too off topic, so what makes DuckDB? Is just distributed? It's just a distributed database?
It's just written recently.
Okay.
With these types of workloads in mind. And it's on, and I only just barely added that. And I wanted to say, well, it's not actually limited. These are file formats on disk. There are actually queries that you can run on DuckDB that are comparable in speed to these file formats on disk. But for my own work, I only use file formats on disk because I want to disengage from the rest of the world while I'm doing my work. So I want it on my machine. But anyway, that's another matter. Well, let's just say there's certain anointed formats. I haven't even gotten to the rest of the slide. But let's just say you've stored it in an efficient format that's accessible to lots of processors or just to your laptop. It doesn't care. It just needs to scale. That scaling means it handles the big stuff, but it also handles the small stuff. Any solution will work for the small things. So those aren't even interesting. Let's focus as a community on the tools that do scale. and then the rest is easy. If it doesn't come at a huge cost, and I'm going to argue it doesn't. Okay, so data exists. Great. Can you access it? Well, if you use FS-Spec, this is actually built into pandas now. That was, I guess I should point out, I do work at Anaconda. This little symbol here means we've done a lot of work on that library. We don't own these libraries, even the ones with little star, like Dask. There are people working on Dask across the world, but we did start the project. Some of these I own, like my team owns Data Shader. We run that HP plot panel. So my team owns several of these things. Anaconda owns these things, owns in the sense that pretty much all the main contributors are on salary at Anaconda. But then a lot of them are just, we heavily collaborate with them. So I just want to point that out, that I am from a corporation. We do have a corporate identity, and we also feed a bunch of money into these projects. So it's not just completely random. We've put money into each project. We have people running them, and we tell people to work together. Otherwise, these would go off in 50 different directions, but we make them work together. And so this is a coherent set of tools that each has its own identity. You can download FS-Spec and use it all by itself. Fine. But I'm not here to talk about that today. I'm here to talk about how to put these together into a stack to solve every problem ever written. So, all right. So FS-Spec. I'm not even to the bold games yet. All right. So FS-Spec, that just lets you access data wherever it is on the world cleanly. FS-Spec will read it on your local hard drive. It'll read it on a web server. It'll read it on FTP server or cloud blob storage, whatever. FS-Spec just lets you read data, and as long as you can do that, and it does it quickly, then it can feed one of these things, which is probably where most people think they start when they do a data analysis. Fire up pandas. Or pandas is great for columnar data. X-array is great for multidimensional array or cube data, which is why it has this logo. And these are meant to be columns, I guess. And then we also support GPU-based libraries. So Rapids and CuPy are the GPU equivalents of those. And then we also trying to support all of science. Pandas is columnar data, so header and then a bunch of observations, one per column. X-array is stacks of data, multidimensional arrays. Awkward array is awkward data, generally ragged data. So for instance, the shapes of the United States. So Colorado, 4 points. Texas, lots of points. And so to try to put that in a column is very hard. Awkward array handles variable linked data like that really well. GraphBLOS handles graphs and networks. So the vast majority of things in science are in one of these categories, or they're text or structured text. And we have not gotten to text or structured text. So that's in the future work. These are all numeric, and this covers the vast majority of numeric workflows one way or another. You can cram it into one of these. Okay, you've done that. Then now you need to do something with it. Well, we haven't gotten to here. This will be domain-specific code, but there are a few items in this category that are completely generic and don't care what domain you are. Number one, Numba lets you write Python code and then compile it to machine code. It doesn't translate it to C. It's just as fast as C, as fast as Fortran. It's as fast as you could write in any language because it's compiled to machine code. And if it's not great, you put little hints, and now it's great. So you can write in Python, compile as fast as you want. And then you tap out the single machine, like you have 8 cores. Numba will help you drive all 8 cores completely, fully. It doesn't care about the Python GIL. It's not running Python anymore. So it will allow you to use everything that's available locally. And then if that's not enough, then you add Dask. And that allows you to take over every machine in the building, every machine in Texas, every machine in the universe. If you have permissions, you can do it. So Dask gives it scalability. And then Data Shader is a project from my group. It's, you can think of it as visualization, but it's also a very fast histogrammer. So really it takes data and then aggregates it or collates it and collects it. And so it's a crucial step on this pathway where you start with enormous amounts of data, then you run it to Data Shader, and then you try to show that to a human. But it doesn't have to be for visualization. It actually is for any aggregation ever. So it's quite general purpose. It's not specific to a domain. So it goes in this column. And then we kind of skip over this part, which is where you have to do work. If you're in finance, you've got to write a finance library that builds on all this and then supports these visualization tools.
Magic happens.
Yeah, profit over here, magic here. That's right. And I'll show you an example. The magic can be 6 lines, but you do need magic. You need something that is about something you care about, because these things don't care about you. None of these things care about your domain. None of them have ever heard of your domain. They are totally generic, totally general. And so you have to bring in something that's about your domain. That's you or someone in your field. Like over here, if you care about doing raster geospatial processing, you're in luck. There's a perfectly good library that builds on all of these and works perfectly here. You don't have to write it. If you're doing MEGs, that's a type of brain imaging. Great, there's already one that's building on it. If you're doing processing of radar imagery, you can do it. There are certain things that are, certain machine learning algorithms have been scaled up with DAS so that they're parallelized here. Certain image processing algorithms have been attacked. This is going to have an infinite number of libraries in it. This should have a few libraries per domain, because it has to be whatever you care about in your domain. It's an application of these general purpose tools to your particular problem. And some of these tools are super specific. Some of them are general, trying to account for a whole field. These are all going to appear, disappear. Somebody's going to write one for their PhD, then they'll go away and you'll never see them update the library. This is meant to be transitory, specific. So I made those things small, those logos. I don't want you to trust any of these in particular. I'm not saying anything about them, just that they exist. And if you're going to do some work, you need something in that box, whether you wrote it or not. But you don't have to. Now you can go back to the happy shared stuff across all the domain. And all these tools will help you visualize anything that is being processed here. And crucially, they'll do it without, they'll do it in situ, how it is. If it's distributed across 1,000 cloud processors, great, leave it there. The data shader, you combine data shader and HV plot, it'll data shade each one of those independently 1,000 different times, and then take the rendered result, combine it all, and that's what you see in a web browser. And so you have distributed computation, efficient computation in situ, and that's what you see. That's what you visualize at any moment. Yes?
So when do we get to whine about the libraries you've left off your stack?
I think that's a slide later. There is a slide about that. The ones I left off the stack, you didn't even complain about the ones I put on the stack. You can argue about them. Like some of them are like awkward is previously was domain specific. That came from physics. He's got a grant. He's working to make it domain independent, and we're working with him. So we're saying it goes here. Other people could say, hey, no, that's a physics library. Get that out of here. We think we're pushing behind it. Sure, physics is everything. Yeah.
Damn straight.
No, I'm an engineer. Anyway, H3 plot, that comes from my group. That's a drop-in replacement for pandas.plot and xarray.plot, but it supports data shader and it supports interactive plotting with bokeh. We don't have to get into that, but choose whatever you want. Matplotlib can be used directly with pandas and xarray, and that's totally okay if you want that. Or H3 plot can generate bokeh, Matplotlib, and plotly. These are all good choices. You should, of course, use the one from my group, but they're all good choices, and they all can support this workflow. And then in the end, you end up needing to show things to human beings, and either you can just, by default for data science, you drop them down into Jupyter, or you can make something for non-technical people that you share using panel. You can embed a lot of these in other dashboarding approaches too. But panel is tested and used by all the people involved in these projects. So they're mutually reinforcing, and we know it has good performance and so on. And if you're an organization, well, install Jupyter Hub. That gives Jupyter to everyone, and then do everything else like you would if you weren't in an organization. And of course, like promised by Jacob, yes, install it with Conda. A lot of these things have binary, well, actually, a lot of these things have binary dependencies that make them hard to install. The native libraries in the stack actually are written in Python generally, and just involve, they're easy to install. CuPy and Rapids are not easy, because those are tied to your local GPU driver. Those are a mess to get running. But most of the rest of these are actually just pure Python and easily installable, or Numba, which goes out of its way to become easily installable, even not on Conda. But in general, you're going to need some weird binary stuff. You're going to want Conda. Okay, so I figured this slide would take a long time to go through. I need to work on how to tell this story. But this is at least defined. What I'm saying is definitely in the stack. Maybe by the end of the evening, we'll have more items in the stack. I hope so. And some of the key technologies I've already pointed to, so I won't get into here. That's just if you were reading the slides later. And then just wanted to really call out, the SOSA stack does not include your domain-specific code. But if you've already got some code and it's embedded in this nasty domain-specific stack that's tied down, if you can pull out a little bit and make it compatible with the stack, you can do some great stuff. And there are examples of people who have done that. And particular, if you happen to be an old C hacker like me, and you just had some loops that were just basically C code, well, you're in good shape, because that will just drop right in the middle of this workflow. Data will come in, you run it through a few loops, you put numba JIT on the top, and you're done. You don't need, already got the file formats, you've got the data access, it's distributed, it's visualizable, you're ready. You can do your complete science. More realistically, though, you're going to have to do some work. Or you're going to have to pay us and we do the work, but that's probably not going to happen. That's not why I'm here today. NASA pays us a lot of money to make this stack work well for climate data. And they have a particular problem of huge amounts of data, huge models, enormous simulations, generally somewhere very far away. And so they need something that works over the wire, that works remotely, that works in a web browser, just like all these things there. So a lot of this actually came through a project, a NASA-related project called Pangeo. But I'm not saying that much here because Pangeo is very specific to a certain domain of geoscience. And this talk is about the opposite of Pangeo. That's about applying all this same stack to the problems of geoscience. So they actually will take the same slide here and keep some of these and then delete others. Some of these have to do with geoscience, the others don't. And most of these current ones here, most of these are actually geoscience related. GRIB is, NetCDF is geoscience, Cloud Optimize is GeoTIFF, that's geoscience, and that's used in geoscience. So a lot of the ones that currently have converters, so they act well, are for an existing domain there. So I'll show you some examples. Actually, I'll show you one really quick just to make it concrete. Yes? Yeah, that's the example where it works for a tiny little chunk of code. So I want to really just point that out. So this is a kind of throwaway example that I made that just makes pretty pictures. It doesn't mean anything for science. I did make this one. Okay, I made this one, this code, this implementation of it. I'm not Clifford, who discovered it. And so I don't want to take credit for Clifford's work, but so Clifford defined something called an attractor, which is basically you're here in a plane, you have iterative equations that say where you're next in the plane. Given you're here, where are you next? Given you're here, where are you next? You just run these equations. The equations are pretty straightforward. It's just right here. Your new value is your old value passed through this equation. Some sine and cosine terms. It doesn't matter what it is because it doesn't mean anything. It's just pretty. So you do this a few million times and you get a pretty picture. So this is the entire code. It's Numba code. NumPy is involved, Panda's involved. All this does is create some NumPy arrays of 20 million NumPy, 2 columns, each 20 million numbers long for X and Y, and then fills them all in and then plots them using data shader. So this is the plot that does it. Yes, I will. Briefly, but then I'll have widgets, so I'll have to do it back. All right, so this is the function. If you call that function and you tell it, I want, how many zeros is that? 20 million data points. This is actually not running. Let me switch to one that is running. Okay, so let's see. How long does 20 million data points take to not just plot, but compute and then plot? So that's how long it takes. And that's running on this machine right here. It's an older Mac. I have a much newer one, but this is one I take out of the house, and it doesn't matter if it gets hurt. This is 2015 era. And so that's computing 20 million points and doing it here. It uses all the cores. Yes? All right. All right. So anyway, it's using all the cores. Many problems will fit on this laptop when you use Numba because it uses all your available power. It uses all the cores. It does it as fast as machine code. You almost never have to leave this laptop. And I love this laptop. So I don't like leaving it. But so there's no reason to have some big distributed solution that involves cloud resources and paying AWS and all these things. You don't need any of that if it fits here. So first step, make it fit here, Numba. So how does that work? This is the only bit of Numba that you need. It just says JIT. And it looks like magic. It is magic. The magic about it is that this is a C-style loop. Numba can handle any C-style loops. For loops, iterate, do something over and over and over. It can handle all of those. Now, there are plenty of Python constructs it cannot handle. Don't do those inside your inner loop. Do those elsewhere. You have an inner loop with a big loop like this. It can be nested. It can have 50 levels of nesting. That's fine, but have it all just be C-like things, and Numba can just make it go as fast as possible, and you never have to worry about it again. I'm not going to take that off and try it without. I would have to make it not do very much. And here, all it's doing is a rendering an image. This isn't using any of our fancy visualization tools. It's just using Data Shader to do a 2D histogram of X and Y. How many dots landed in each pixel as you're going around? That's all that's being shown here. It's just a plot of a two-dimensional histogram. And then here's panel. We can turn it into a little app. And my argument is that being able to be interactive like this is crucial because it allows you to explore parameter spaces and understand how these things behave in ways that would take you a long time to type in and do it. So if you want to do science or analysis or engineering, you've got to make it super easy to just sit there and try out everything. So that's my claim. This stack really supports that claim really well.
I would also say that it's great if you're showing off your little apps and you have little sliders. Recruiters love it because they don't know how to run your code, but they know how to press buttons and slide dials.
A little slider, that's right.
It's actually really big.
That's the one line that's needed to run this function. I mean, this is not anything we ever use in practice. We built complicated apps, but if you just have a function that's got some parameters, I'll interact on it, and you just get a little. It just deduces for each one of those parameters that it needs a slider. And so cheap and easy slider, you do it, throw away, you do it, you play it around with it, you delete it. It's not a web front-end development project. It's just you interacting with your data and your code and understanding things. So that's what that is designed to support.
James, it's important for you to actually tell that you are able to, when you actually move the sliders, the things compute the entire 20 million points each time you move the slider, correct?
You can turn it so that it only does it when you can chain it so there's a button here saying generate. So if when you drag it, it takes 5 minutes to run. You're going to want to say delay execution. Don't do it when I do the slider. Wait till I'm ready. Okay, now go. Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm trying to tell people about the speed. It actually, when you move the slider, it computed all those 20 million points on your laptop. Each time.
Oh, that's correct. In this case, it's only 1 million, but that's just because where things are dragged right now. That's right. Every time I move a slider, it's recomputing, like in this case where I didn't get into some weird part of the parameter space. Not all the parameters, a lot of the parameter space, all the points land on the same spot. You hit a little attractor and it doesn't go anywhere. So where you are in the next spot are the same. So it becomes a very boring plot. But anyway, this one's not in a boring plot. So here it's doing 1 million points every time I drag this. And so it's important to have fast, not just because fast is great, it's a fast car, but because you're a human being with a finite lifespan and how many things are you going to look at in your lifetime? Well, if it's as fast as this, you're going to look at a lot, and you're going to make discoveries, and you're going to realize anomalies, and you're going to find things that are wrong, and you're finding things that are exciting. None of that's going to happen if every time I drag this, it takes 10 minutes. I think number is important. That's why it's in this list, because
Performance is a feature we don't talk about.
I agree. All right, so I wanted to kind of define this space, kind of back to core set. You need if you say these things are great, you have to say what's not in the set in order to find a decision boundary. So what is not in SOSA? Ray is not in SOSA. Ray is a great program developed independently from Dask at the same time, roughly the same time. It was released later, but it started around the same time, so it's not weird that they created this project. But it's an independent project. None of these other tools support it. Great, you're in the Ray stack. I don't know what they call it. But if you're using Ray, it doesn't fit here. You could try to force it in. You could try to convert it. None of the other tools understand a Ray data frame or a Ray data structure. So if you try to plot it, it'll just fail. So you can totally use Ray, but then you're not part of the stack. And we're not going to really add support for it unless somebody's really demanding it. We probably are going to add Polar support just because we're starting to use it a little some of the time. Vakes, less so, because Vakes does a lot of the same things as Datashader, a lot of the same things as Dask. It's a perfectly good project done by good people. It's not part of the stack. Hadoop and Spark, I'm not going to say the same nice things about that, but it's what people often say is big data, but this is big data based on the JVM. That kind of big data does not play nicely on your laptop. That is high overhead big data. It only works big. Whereas everything here works small, it works big, it doesn't care because it's low overhead. You don't have to start up a virtual machine to do your work. You're just doing your work. So it's there's very low effort in getting started. And so all of these tools are built around a different approach than the JVM based approaches. And a lot of the Apache tools are all assuming this JVM is there somewhere for their work. And so we use some of the things that came out of the Apache project, a great project. We use Parquet and Arrow from that because those can be used without a JVM. They just have their spec, and you just follow the spec, and we did so outside of it. And so they're great specs. But a lot of the other tools, it's just like, they're just not relevant. You add one of those tools, everything gets very slow, very clunky, very hard to work with. Doesn't help science of an individual scientist who starts on a laptop. Usually that's what happens. You start on a laptop. You're doing a problem and you realize you need to scale up. It doesn't really support that. It supports, I'm an enterprise with big data workflows. So what? Not relevant. Different stack. Vega Fusion, somebody in my group has created that as a way to have Datashader-like things for Altair, which is great. I think every plotting package should have something Datashader-like, but we haven't integrated into the rest of it. So Datashader supports Bokeh, Plotly, and Matplotlib. It doesn't support Altair or any other library.
James, did you consider there was a library you introduced, Ray, like a parallel to Dask, but there are libraries now that kind of abstract everything. I'm specifically talking about Fugue. Did you consider it or looked at it or?
You're talking about what? I didn't hear that.
There's a library called Fugue. I'm pronouncing it right. It's like the instrument.
Like a Bach fugue?
Maybe. It's a library.
F-U-G-U-E?
Yeah. Did you look at it?
Okay. No, I do not know that library. So
okay, so
that could be in the category.
So just like you abstract with the all the graphics like Matplotlib and Bokeh, and you sit on top and you abstract those. You use like hrootplot talks to all of those. So Fugue talks to Dask and to Ray and several others, even to Pandas.
Ah, no, yeah, that could well be interesting. Yes.
I can connect you to the developer if you're interested.
Yes, please. That sounds really cool. It would be great to have free support for other libraries targeting one interface. I don't believe it. I'm pretty sure that we're going to have an overhead because of the different models that these libraries use. But if there is an abstraction that can achieve that, I am interested. So
I will.
we'll
I'll send an introduction letter in the video. You'll get
Very
it.
cool. Okay. Now I am not going to dive deep here, but I did send the slides to people, And basically what the rest of these slides are about is my argument, why these properties of the SOSA tools are important and why they set SOSA tools apart from the non-SOSA tools. And just to reiterate, they're domain independent. Here's why I think that is. Efficiency, we already talked about that. Yes? You can post the link. You've got it. Okay. So, okay. So being domain independent, I already argued for that. I already argued for efficient with help from you about why performance is important. I've argued for scalable. I think my argument there is probably the weakest, because most people don't know they need scalable. My real argument is you can do a lot of work, but if somebody else is doing bigger work and they have to use an entirely different tool set, I don't like that, because I don't like fracturing the world into a bunch of people with artificial boundaries between them. I work at Anaconda. We help everyone in every domain. That's what we're here for. We cut across everything, and I don't want to put my effort into anything that's only going to work for a narrow subset of use cases. I want to pour all our efforts in, all of our corporate money that we're getting from everywhere, poured into these tools. I want those tools to work for everybody. So if some agency gives us a grant, we want that to go into something that someone else can use all over the place. So personally, I insist that it's scalable for all our own work. A lot of people think, oh, me? I don't need that. It doesn't add much, it doesn't add user complexity, it would be my argument. If you can use pandas and you're happy, I'm not going to tell you to use Dask. And all these tools are just going to use pandas and they're going to be fine. So having these tools also support Dask, also support GPUs, well, that's a problem for the tool maintainers, really. You don't have to really be affected by that. So as a tool maintainer, I'm going to argue I'm only going to invest in scalable tools because everything else is a waste of time. But that may be less convincing to individual users, and I grant that. I'm an old school command line Emacs person. I want everything to be scriptable because I'll be damned if I'm going to sit and click and point and click and point to get my work done ever. But here's my reason why it might matter to other people, not just me. Cloud friendly. I'm trying to separate cloud friendly and what's the other one? Scalable and cloud friendly are pretty related, but it's hard to separate. But I want to argue that you can have scalability on a local cluster, you can have scalability on a supercomputer, but cloud friendly is a special kind of scalability that allows you to, you just take into account the fact that you're getting it from a cloud provider. They typically are Linux machines, they typically have these properties. We support that 100% and fully, as opposed to a lot of scientific code, particularly older scientific code, supports certain supercomputers fully, and everything else not so good. The code written in the 60s, 70s, 80s is like that. So in particular, that code doesn't support browser-based visualization. Instead, they support exporting a subset of the data down to a local client that'll run in your Windows machine. That's what they're expecting. You run a huge job at some faraway lab with guards. It runs, you get some output, and you put that on your machine, and now you can, oh, did it work? And that's not what we're doing here. We're saying, run it on the cloud, 1,000 processors, watch it happen in real time, tell it to render every so often, update your screen, have the abort button. This is an interactive workflow that is cloud friendly, not so much HPC. Make use of every available compute power. Why not? Just have the tool support it all. GPU, CPU, Mac, Windows, whatever. You choose whatever you want to work on. It's Python. It should work everywhere. Numba doesn't care. Numba will compile it for each machine you're on. You don't really need any hints for the architecture. It doesn't care. It does care between GPU and CPU, but for our work, we made everything work GPU and CPU. Well, many things work GPU. Yes?
I was just reading a question. Check that.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm about to just cut to questions. So they're compositional. You download any of these things. In fact, that's the problem right now. They're all compositional. They're all separately maintained, different people, different websites. You don't even know that they have this relationship, that they all work smoothly together. But it's important that they have a relationship because it means they solve a problem today for somebody. They're going to solve a different problem for a different person tomorrow, and that's fine. Because somebody's going to add a little component in the mix or take a component out or change one. It's all going to work because that's how it already works. And I already said why you have to visualize it. Basically, if you have anything that doesn't visualize, that's where your bugs are going to be hiding, guaranteed. So you just have to make everything visualizable, and then your bugs have nowhere to hide. Stands to reason, right? Already argued why it's interactive. I think it's super important for it to be shareable as well, because if you get it, you want to be able to share it to somebody. These tools share, you can share it. Jacob likes to share it as HTML files. So he does all sorts of great Python stuff and he hits export. And in the end, he gets an HTML file. It's a pretty big one, but an HTML file that has all of his data embedded in, all the plots, everything. And then you can hand that to anybody in the world. That's one way to do it. We actually now support, as of this year, WASM, which means you actually embed the entire Python interpreter into there. And that's crazy, but it actually works. And it's not even that slow, and it's pretty amazing. PyScript is an example of WASM. In our work, we favor PyDide right now, today, because PyDide supports a separate web worker that we can do lots of things. PyScript will support that. So PyScript is where all the money is going into at Anaconda. There's a lot of support for PyScript, and eventually it's going to surpass what we're doing today. But as of today, we're mainly using PyDide. Same technology, though. Or you can stand up a live Python server, which is hopefully only for the biggest problems nowadays. And I haven't even talked about it much. It's open source, and that is super important because everything else has a limit. Everything that's not open source has somebody telling you no. It says, no, license expired. No, you don't have a license for that many machines. No, company's out of business. You're not even allowed to use it anymore. You can just do anything you want. That's I work at a company. I'm still pushing open source, and that's how we do everything. And that includes open source for commercial use. Make as much money off these tools as you want. We'll be very proud. We might ask you for a donation or something, but it's totally unlimited. You just start a business on it. Go for it. Fill in that gray box for medical image analysis. Great. Make tons of money on that. Go for it. All right. So takeaways. Do some work, try some of these tools. Think about it. If you're in a position where either you or somebody near you is building software, take a breath and delete everything. Build a tiny little chunk of software. Or don't delete everything. Take out one little chunk, check it first, and then delete the rest. That chunk is super important because that encompasses your expertise about your domain. That's what you should be focusing on. Your domain, whatever that is, you're the expert in that, or your friend or your boss is. Great, focus on that. We'll do the rest. All right, so here's where there's audience participation. Has anyone heard of anyone doing anything like this? And if so, tell me about it. Maybe not in public, because that's going to be a detailed question. But this you can say in public. What's missing here are things that complement what's already in SOSA. I don't want another copy of what's in SOSA with a different name, but something that complements and it adds new capability, just like Awkward Array adds new capabilities to everything. So we're super excited about supporting that. We want more things like that, things that go into areas that we don't, that all fit together and increase our power, increase the ability to dominate the entire world of science and engineering and analysis. All right, questions? Yes.
I have one.
Okay, Jacob, you first, and then there's one local.
Okay, go to the local. I'll be last. I'm long.
All right.
All right. I had a question if you've considered Python. I'm not sure if you've heard of that.
I have certainly considered Python. I'm old. I've done everything. So yes, we use Python for many years. Python is great. Python is not nearly as seamless. So before Python, we used something called Weave. Weave let me write Python, quote string, C code, end quote, and then tell it weave this string. And that was really awkward, but man, it worked. I don't know why nobody else wanted to do that, but I was using that for years. And so I went smoothly from C code, a huge C code base, to a tiny little string of C. My like 50,000 lines of C went down to 50 lines of C. That was where all the time was spent of Weave code. And then we created the Python version of that. So the Weave code is horrible because C code is a string. Python looks nice, but it's a separate file that you have to link in, and it's not really Python. It was frustrating for us. It was hard. And then nowadays we use Numba, and Numba, it is Python. There's no string. There's no separate file. It just is Python. If you comment that out or just do an environment variable, no JIT or whatever it is, then it uses the interpreter. And if you don't, it uses the compiler. And it's just so much smoother. So I totally love Numba. Python was great for a certain period in my youth. I don't know. There are probably a bunch of use cases where it's super important. There are tons of other use cases for things like bind, various ways of interfacing with C. I have no use for any of them, but you may, and that goes in that gray box. Okay. Anyone else local? Yes.
So you mentioned that you were working on getting like text-based, I guess, programs in the stack. Have you considered Elasticsearch? That seems to be the most, I guess, common text-based like index for textual data.
I probably overstated the working on part. We're kind of imagining working on those things, and we don't have direct use cases. And as I mentioned at the very start of the talk, I run our consulting projects with external customers. So if we have an external customer tomorrow that has a good use case that involves text, we're going to come up with a good solution. It's going to join this stack. Until that happens, I don't need to solve any of my personal problems, and so it's going to be where it is. Somebody on my team also, if one of them has a personal issue or a personal question they're addressing, that'll happen. Otherwise, it'll happen if we're paid to do it. Meanwhile, all this stuff happens every day.
Thank you.
Okay, Jacob, and then let's start reading. I can pull up the chat here. Jacob?
Yeah, so a comment for first. Last slide had to do about open source, and it's usually I have to add this comment because it seems sometimes the word open source is misleading. Open source doesn't mean you're allowed to do everything. Open source, you have to understand what the restrictions are, and sometimes they usually have less than other code, but do look at it. So I know I'm stopping your marketing that open source is also so permissive. It has its own limitations sometimes. I just gave a talk about it this Friday. But
So go ahead.
My question was about the WASM thing. It's like you kind of like, this is new. I haven't heard about it. But can they reduce the size of the huge files that I'm producing?
Yes, although they're going to be somewhere. That data has to live somewhere. So in that case, it'd just be a separate file that's fetched dynamically when somebody's looking at it. So yes, but it won't be as self-contained as you have, or it'll be in fact bigger. So let me just do a tiny demonstration.
Please do. I want to see.
This is WASM. So here I'm looking at a website. This is a normal web server. It's just a web server. It only knows how to show. It finds HTML files on disk and it delivers them. It doesn't know about Python. There's no Python process running. But if I click this thing, it gives me a warning. You're about to download all of Python. Okay. All right. So it's loading Python. It's load some other stuff, and then it's going to actually run this cell in Python in my browser. So right now it's fetching effectively the Anaconda distribution into my browser page. So it says it's about 40 megabytes on this Wi-Fi. That'll take a few seconds. On my Google Fiber at home, it's super quick. But it's limited by it's actually copying NumPy right now. It's copying all the things that that it needs to be able to run this. Copying bokeh down here. This is slower than usual, but it's basically running. Just the same way an HTML page runs JavaScript, WASM allows you to run any language in the world. And in particular, it allows you to run Python because it's Python compiled for WASM, just like it could be Rust compiled for WASM or whatever it is. WASM is sort of like a virtual machine. You can think of it like that, or more like a JVM, more like a Java virtual machine than a full virtual machine. But it's a machine that you can generate bytecode for, generate machine code for, and then that runs in the browser, in your browser tab. And so it's not working very well right now.
No, it's if it's downloading 40 megabytes over Wi-Fi, then it might stop you.
Yeah, probably there are other people with video streams here. I don't know what it is, but anyway, not working very well.
No. That's good. Now you explain what's going on. So still, it's like unless I get to files which are like 100 megabytes, then it's still the WASM will take me about the same bandwidth if I like take and save everything as HTML as you prefer, as you allow it now.
Right. And if you think about the attractors example, WASM doesn't currently support Numba, which is irritating. But as soon as it does, the attractors example would run in your browser, And that means that the attractors would be rendered inside your browser, and they don't need to be transferred from anywhere. So then you'd have a fixed size that is just some Python package. Oh, it's finally finished. Man, okay. So now this is live. This is not JavaScript running. It's calling into Python. Every time I drag this, it's doing some amazing computation called return X. But this is actually running Python when you...
So without getting too distracted, is this was like the PyScript? You can get an extension so that you only have to install the whole Python thing, or you only have to download the Python once. The other libraries you have to download depending on like the page. They probably cache it and stuff. But like, could you just have this in your browser so that you don't have to download it for each website you go to?
That's already happening here. If I needed to reload this page, it would still be there for a
But if
while.
you went to like a different website that uses a Python,
it'll use a different version of Python.
So it'll still install
different copies of
everything. Yeah,
everything.
okay.
And so that's one thing that we can, well, there are two things that we're doing. This is total aside, but one is to get people to organize around a smaller number of versions and releases, so that make a single jump from here to here. And those are, and make everyone aligned to those, so there's far less downloading. The other is to do some pretty crazy things of slicing up the standard library and slicing up libraries to only download things dynamically. Even though you wrote import whatever, it doesn't actually import. This is lazy. And then in certain, whenever you need a certain function, it'll pull that, a certain class will pull that. We have demonstrations of that. That's off the books. That's the way. That's because any given app only uses a tiny fraction of what's available. There's a good future in that, but it's going to be a while, I think. So, anyway, so that's not very exciting, but anyway, that is running in the browser, so it's demonstrating that.
This is very nice.
Yeah. And that's the least exciting one. I just picked a random page. There are ones that actually have plots and whatever, so it supports everything except data share, which but that's not up to us. That's up to Numba. All right, so we had another question here. Can you use it on an iPad? Yes, you can use it on anything with a web browser. So in terms of Jupyter running there, sure, you just navigate to Jupyter running on a remote kernel in some cloud host, whatever. It's not running on your iPad, it's running there. Most of the tools can be compiled to run on there. We don't currently have a native iPad app interface, but we're working on that in Panel. We're also working with another Anaconda project called Beware, which gives native apps on different devices. So you can use it anywhere you use a web browser today. And then for really solid iPad support, for instance, if you're doing data collection and everything else is elsewhere, that's a very reasonable use case for that. We'll have a good answer to that. Oh, and Jacob mentioned open source has restrictions. All of these are BSD licensed or MIT licensed. Those are in a family called permissive licensing. And therefore, so GPL is a non-permissive license. It's very much geared towards academia, doesn't allow commercial usage. The permissive ones are a larger set of uses. And so when I say it's a permissive license, that's what I mean. You can make money off of it and no one will care. Well, they might care, but can't stop you.
Those are nice licenses, but people still have to look at the small print.
You do have to look at the small print. There is attribution and so on.
Yeah.
So that's iodide with an O. So iodide, there's a history there. Never mind. HPC is high performance computing. That's right. Okay, any other questions on the chat? Okay.
No, I would just like to shout out the attractors demo. You apparently taught me Numba, so thank you very much. It's actually an excellent demo. You should all check it out. A lot of fun, very interactive. Great.
I did write those 4 characters at JIT. I wrote
that
those.
was big.
That's
very big. You'll see the demo. You'll see they have the performance profiling, and you'll see how much faster it is. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And if there's no more questions, I think we could just thank you for giving the talk. Thank you. Well, great. And that concludes our speakers. So everyone who's here, we can stay here and mingle a little more. You can do whatever you want to do. It's your time. But thanks again to our speakers and everyone who came. It's been another fun time. We're going to keep the meeting open. and let people just mingle and talk.